for that meeting, and we'll put it to our YouTube channel that you guys know by now, the http bit.ly Atlanta BIRX. I'm gonna put the link at some point in the chat window. But I'd like to welcome you. Thank you so much for coming, for joining us today, October 3rd. This is our monthly meeting. We typically meet on a first Monday of every month, actually. And for the past couple of years, our meetings have been virtual. Speaking of which, we have good news in here. I mean, it looks like we're going to start meeting back in person because the Microsoft Office has reopened. In fact, Microsoft now has not one, but two offices. Those of you from Atlanta probably know that they made a huge investment midtown. But we will continue meeting in the Alpharetta office because this is where we used to meet for a few years. There's going to be proof of vaccination that will be required. And by the way, the first meeting that we plan to be in person will be in December. The December, I think, 3rd, if I'm not wrong, whatever Monday that is, or 7th, I forgot. So this meeting, the next one are going to be virtual, and then we're going to hopefully do a soft in-person reopening in December with the goal to start meeting back in person for some time. Probably our meetings are going to be hybrid, both in person and online. Microsoft requires vaccination proof. I'm going to send you all of this. They have a link to a website where you have to prove, where you have to upload your vaccination. So if you cannot make it, we will, for some time, we will also do recordings. As you probably remember, those of you who actually been group for a while, I don't like recording so that much because I wanted to build this community spirit in Atlanta where we meet, we know each other, but we'll see how that's gonna go. So soft reopening, we plan in December, starting in December. Our group site, as usual, is the meetup, and I put the link in here. This is our main website. Those of you who are new, not sure if we have any new people today, but make sure you go to this meetup group and subscribe if you want to get notifications. And I'm going to put in the chat window the link to recordings. So there is a group question: will the meeting be hybrid given some of the guests not being local? Yes, the meetings, at least for some time, will be, as I mentioned, hybrid. What I'm concerned of with this is that hopefully we're not going to have the same experience as here, Mark, because what's happening right now, typically a lot of people confirm, like for example, the last time we had 100 confirmation, and if we are lucky to get 1/5 of those coming actually, that will be a success for our, virtual meetings. Because at the last moment, a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to actually watch the recording. So I know as a speaker, this is really not that exciting. So we'll see how that's going to go, and I will give it some time for this hybrid idea. But the idea is that, again, I would like people to come in person if possible. All right. So what's happening on the Microsoft BI side of things? Couple of events here worth mentioning. Microsoft biggest conference, Microsoft Ignite, used to be called TechEd. It's actually next week. And of October 12th and 14th. I believe is going to be a free event. You just have to subscribe. And then we have the PASS Data Community Summit next month, actually, November 15th to 18th. That one actually is going to be a paid event, I believe, in person. So it's always a good show. Take a note of these events. On the latest features since the last time we met, nothing terribly exciting going on, earth-shattering or anything like this. A few things that I want to mention here that caught my attention. On the Power BI side of things, we have mobile formatting options that go general availability. I'm going to show you a little bit demo for those of you who haven't seen that, but essentially now, if you want to optimize your reports for mobile rendering, the options are right now much better that we have in Power BI Desktop. That used to be before. I'm going to show you that a little bit. It's better for you to see it than try to explain what it does. On the DAX side of things, those of you who are actually building international applications, targeting different cultures, internet data localization is a big topic. Those of you who have done it, it's not easy. But at least now we have a DAX function called user culture that you can detect what culture the user actually, the end user has, and that's based on the browser settings. So what this user culture is going to return is going to be the culture identifier. So for example, for English in the United States, is going to be EN-US. And if you want to do something in your measures, like a formatting or something like that, and let's say the culture neutral formats are not enough that we have in Power BI, then actually you can check this in your measures, DAX measures. You can check the user culture and you can react accordingly. And then Power BI Report Server. This is our Microsoft on-prem offering. So not many people are using it. Essentially, this is the beefed up version of reporting services with the ability to deploy Power BI reports to it if you want to have kind of an on-prem portal. As you know, that one is actually updated on a quarterly basis, and we had our September release with some new features added to the product. I think that's pretty much it on the news side of things. Oh, something that I forgot. So on this first slide in here, I typically give the opportunity for you guys to advertise any job openings you may have. So if someone is looking for BI talent in the Power BI space, Microsoft BI, you can announce your offering, so you can put it in the chat for people to see it. If you want to get more involved, especially starting in December when we start meeting in person, I'm always looking. Actually, probably need to update that slide because one thing that I removed, but now we will need it, is what? Sponsors, right? We need speakers, sponsors. That's the biggest challenge of running a group. So we need somebody to actually buy us pizza, right? So if your company is interested to do it, doesn't matter BI or whatever, interested to come here, to come actually in the Microsoft office, buy us like $200 worth of food. We really appreciate it because no one sponsors this group. We're kind of self-reliant. So, and also if you want to present, if you know somebody who is interesting, also let me know. By the way, I would like to take a moment to thank the other organizers. My name is Teo Lachev. I actually started this group 12 years ago. On the call, we have John, we have Damo, we have Eric. All of these people kind of involved in running the group. So I'm going to be relying on you guys even more, when we start meeting back in person. So kudos to everyone. All right, cool. So this meeting is going to be about embedding reports in an application. Tom's going to do it. And then next meeting is going to be November 7th, where we're going to have back Sandeep Pavar. You know, he did us a very good presentation a few months ago about the AI features in some Power BI visuals. So hopefully he will continue on that topic, talk about machine learning in Power BI. And the last thing before I disappear is I want to show you, remember I told you that there is a new feature that for mobile viewing. So I want to show you a little bit of that. So let's say you've got your Power BI report in here in Power BI desktop, but you want to optimize it for mobile viewing, because what's going to happen if I don't do anything special and the user goes to Power BI mobile, they open it, they request the report, they run it. What's going to happen with that report? Well, that report is going to render in landscape, you know. Doesn't matter how you rotate your phone, portrait or landscape, it's always going to render like this. But this is not really cool if you want to impress your users. So what we want to do here, when they turn the phone in a portrait mode, we want this whole thing to reflow. Want to reflow, but it doesn't by default. So how do we make it reflow? Well, we have to go and create a mobile layout. So we have a button in here. And when you click that button, this is actually the new experience that has been actually there in preview for a while, but now it's in generally available. So we give you, Microsoft gives you more control now. The grid got more dense. So I could drag and drop things. I can arrange them more precisely on this grid. I can go ahead here. I just have more bigger resolution basically to play with to actually create my mobile layout. And then not only this, but I could change something. So for example, maybe for this particular chart, I don't want to show the x-axis because I want to minimize vertical space. So what I can do, I can turn it off. You know, the visualization, some of the format properties on the visualization pane actually are in here. In fact, I think most of them are in here. And so these changes will not affect the original layout of the report. You know, this is just for mobile rendering. So now when I go ahead and deploy that report and the users go in Power BI mobile, they actually, when they're in portrait mode, they will see whatever layout I have created. So we have to do pretty much for every page on the report, at least the ones that we want to optimize for mobile viewing. But that's how it works. So we have a mobile layout, went to GA, more features in there, more control for you. Try it out. Any questions for me on this or any? Yeah.
Hey, on the mobile layout, is there an option for a landscape layout different from the main dashboard, from the desktop?
No, Eric, this is just for the portrait layout. I guess the thinking here is that your actual report will have the landscape layout, but that's a good question. No, it's only portrait. I cannot have a landscape in here that I can optimize. Any other questions, guys? One time, two, three. All right, cool. Well, with that said, we're going to switch to the main presentation. We're excited to have Tom coming in here. Tom, the floor is yours. You know, sing us a song and do us a presentation. Maybe both.
You don't want me to sing you a song. That's why I play bass, so I can hide in the back and just just get the band moving. Thanks a lot, Teo. I appreciate it. So yeah, I'll share my screen and we can get started here. I am going to start with a couple of slides, but I tried to keep the slides to a minimum so we can do more examination and demonstration. So let's start by sharing that screen. Good. Okay. And then we'll start over here. So the background for this presentation is, as I was talking with Theo about what I might speak about, and then I went back through all of the user group presentations. All of sort of my greatest hits were already covered very well by other folks. My main technical area is, Power BI and associated business intelligence technologies. But we thought that this business case and the related technology challenges might be a good source of discussion. So that's what I proposed, and that's what we're going to talk about today. A little bit about me. I have been doing business intelligence for almost 25 years now. I've been doing application development for almost 30 years. And I work for a company called Lucient. We were actually recently acquired by a company called Soaring Eagle. So I guess it's more correct to say that I work for a company called Soaring Eagle. What I do and what I always have done is a mixture of training and consulting aligned with the Microsoft database and business intelligence stack. I've got a long background with analysis services, the multidimensional version and the tabular version. Before that, a lot of experience with SQL Server, and in the past 6 years or so, I've been very, very intensely focused on business intelligence with Power BI, and a fair amount of Azure analysis services in the mix as well. So this is kind of a hybrid session. We could go super, super deep on the technology side, and we are going to touch on some of the key points on the technology side. But there are available resources that are very well organized, and I will include links to all of these resources. So I really wanted to kind of, narrate the interesting parts and then give people links and other sources to do a much deeper dive. And as someone who goes to a lot of these user group meetings, I always like to see something that's real. Nothing wrong with like an academic example. I love Contoso and AdventureWorks and Northwind and all of that. But if there's something that's actually out there in the wild doing the delivery of analytics, it's cool to see that. So I have permission from my client to demonstrate certain aspects of this. Obviously, this is a real product that's being offered to the market today. There are some, proprietary techniques that I won't be touching on. So there'll be a mixture of demonstrations that show the actual solution, and then some other demonstrations that show some available, at more sort of test data type solutions. The big challenge that we had to surmount to enable this solution for the client was to figure out how to use REST API calls to automatically provision, because the long-term goal for this solution is to basically have a bunch of cookie cutter reports and analytics that we can spin up for every client that comes along. And the last section that I want to cover today is going to be sort of to talk about the gotchas. So where did we stub our toe? Where did we skin our knee? Where did we need to get stitches as we figured out how to implement this? So that's my basic approach. Let me talk about the business case. So the business case, and let me just open up the actual site for it. And I don't want to turn this into a great big advertisement, although I do think that this client is doing a really good job addressing the market. But I do want to talk about sort of the realness of this business case, right? So what their business model is based on is providing performance metrics and services consulting for Amazon resellers. And so the name of the company is Argometrics. It's a small entrepreneurial startup And they've brought this solution to market. They formerly had been doing things, as we might imagine, using good old-fashioned Excel. And they wanted to make something that was sort of a repeatable process that could be built upon, and that's what brought them to considering Power BI. Moving quickly, bringing this to market was a major factor, because this is an area of the industry that's becoming more and more developed. It's still relatively undeveloped. And one of the key marching orders when we started to discuss how to architect this is we don't know where this is going to scale to. Right now, it's still in sort of limited release, although we are taking on new customers, every day. But the potential for the market is, pretty compelling. There are, tons of active sellers. That's a worldwide figure there, that 1.5. But even if you narrow it down to just the United States, it's still, hundreds of thousands. And there's more Amazon sellers happening each day. So the potential market is, really quite compelling. And as a result, we were doing very nimble, very agile, very iterative development. And the solution started, with basically something that was, a prototype that was just consuming kind of some test data. And, the agile approach really was, we didn't do a ton of wireframes or a ton of prototyping. The prototyping was done using a real functional prototype. So, keeping in mind sort of a functional prototype, functional software was the best hallmark of progress. The other thing that was interesting about this from a business standpoint, I need to advance my slide here, was the composition of the team. So the principal from Argometrics is a gentleman named Nick, and he's reasonably technical, but definitely much more business focused. And he also, having a background in Amazon sales, he functioned as sort of our proxy stakeholder for describing what Amazon sellers might need to help manage their business. Then there's me. Primarily focused on sort of the data analytics and calculations, security. So there's a mixed bag from me in terms of the areas that I focused on. Overall architecture, although some of those decisions had been made prior to my coming into the mix, so we did have to work with some decisions that I'm not sure I would have made from the beginning. But again, speed to market, we couldn't sort of stop and refactor things the way we might want to if we had built something from the ground up. And so my focus area, Power BI, Azure, PowerShell, REST APIs. And then I did also offer assistance to the web developers who are responsible for the website, which we'll take a look at in a minute. Then we had basically a worldwide distributed team of people with different focus areas. And the thing that was really kind of interesting to manage, right, is that we had this very strong sort of boundary layer between the team. So Nick spanned across both sides, and then I'm kind of doing the back end and the architecture. And then we have the development team responsible for the website doing the front end. And what this meant from a business use case is, my job was to sort of prove something was possible. I should say I am not a web developer. I would love to be more of a web developer than I am, but that has unfortunately not been a major focus area for me. But I can, stand things up that prove this is how we do it. And I should say, and we'll see some examples of this when I get to my demonstrations, the amount of materials that Microsoft has made available for folks like me to understand what's possible with embedding and with JavaScript. It's really, it's really amazing that this rich set of resources are out there. And so what would happen is Nick and I would, brainstorm about what we would need to do to meet the requirements of the market. And then I'd stand up sort of a skunkworks straw man prototype and say, this is how we would do it. And then send those API calls and JavaScript routines to the web development team, and they would implement it on the website. And it was kind of interesting. I kept throwing things over the wall, and then I would see those features be, implemented on the website eventually. But there wasn't a lot of I never fired up a Teams meeting and looked at them and their PHP and their JavaScript code. It was always make the example, document it, send it over to them, and then they would implement it. So it was a very interesting kind of boundary layer in the team. And the life cycle started as a very modest prototype, just some fairly basic Power BI visuals consuming some test data that was typed into an Excel spreadsheet. And then we went through these phases where we prototyped, and at first what we were doing was continuing to consume this test data from the spreadsheet, but going from a kind of big flat file model to more of what we would consider a typical Power BI model. And actually, let me show that. Let me come over here. And even with this, so this is our data set and our very big complicated model. So it's still somewhat flat file formed, but it performs optimally for what we have now. And then the freestanding table that you see here is just a calculation group table that we're implementing to do our standard time intelligence calculations. So the model is pretty simple, but this moved several steps closer to what we would consider an orthodox dimensional model as intended by Power BI. And that was all done through Power Query against they have essentially a proprietary tabular structure that we consume, and that existed before I came onto the scene, and that does a lot of the data integration steps that we would normally do using something like Power Query or perhaps Azure Data Factory. But again, the existing development was sufficient for our purposes, and that's what we went to market with. So then we, the middle concept there where we did the proof of concept, that was shifting from consuming Excel to shifting to this tabular model. And then, oh, my slide animations didn't work here. So then we first started to deploy using the embedded functionality when we got to sort of a minimally viable product. So that's that fourth piece, and then shifting over to the production. And the difference between the minimally viable product and the production is we were on a tenant in Azure for the MVP that didn't have the kind of elasticity and scalability that we needed when we go to production, because again, we don't know how rapid the uptake for our customers is going to be. And so this final state, and we would call this probably the V1 of the product, we're sitting on the Azure A SKU, and we can scale up with different tiers. So as we start to have increased capacity and increased usage by customers, we can accommodate that by throwing more cloud resources at the platform. One of the things that's key about the solution that we're building And this is actually a pattern that I've heard. There was a recent talk at the Data Insight Summit here in Chicago. And this is there's an internal initiative in Microsoft. I forget who gave the talk, but basically the same idea, and that is every seller, in our case the Amazon sellers, every seller that comes to purchase these services, they get their own workspace, they get their own data set, and they get their own collection of reports. For obvious reasons, we don't need to have a consolidated data set of all the sellers together. So the security and the natural factoring of the security just maps very well to sort of a one-to-one relationship between the sellers and the workspaces. Now, we haven't had a need to do so yet, but we are looking at the ability to do row-level security inside the workspaces within other types of seller organizations. So that's sort of a V2 or V3 version of the product. And some of the links that I'll be sharing at the end of this presentation have examples of using row-level security with embedded. So you'll have some examples on how to do that. The other thing that was a important factoring for us is that we're using the thin report approach. And I don't know if that's an official term, but this is basically the idea that I've got one main data set, and then I have reports that link to that data set in place on the Power BI service. And the reason for this, depending on the subscription level of the sellers, we need to be able to turn on or turn off various reports. And the easiest way to do that, and this was actually requested by the web development team, is to simply create essentially one-page reports, and then we can sort of toggle those on or off. There again, that's a decision that was made early. I'm not sure that's how I would do it these days, knowing more about how to do embedding and showing and hiding things, but it seems to be working. And it does add an additional management layer when we're provisioning reports or when we're changing things. Once everything's in place, it's fine. It doesn't make a difference. But I know that if we have a change to the data set and then we have to reconnect all the reports, that can introduce a little bit of overhead. The other thing that we did as a solution for focusing on how we're refreshing the data, and I feel like I'm confessing a transgression here, because the purists will say this is a really bad idea, but we're not persisting a date dimension as a tabular structure. We're actually defining a virtual date dimension in DAX that dynamically expands based on the earliest transaction date in our sales fact, and expands through to the end of our sales transaction, to the end of the year. And this was really done because the development team was having trouble synchronizing the refreshing between the data set date dimension and the rest of the information in the data set. And so this was an expedient solution, but one that we haven't seen any negatives in terms of performance, and it also turns the refresh instructions it simplifies that refresh step. So this is something that we did to accommodate simplifying the care and feeding of each instance of the seller reports. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what you need to do to set up embedded. So I'm sure everybody who's on the call is familiar with this concept of, I fire up my browser and I go to Power BI, and if my credentials are cached, it lets me go through, and if my credentials are cached, it challenges me to, you know, put in a username and password to log into a particular tenant. So that's this scenario. There's two types of authentication when it comes to embedding. And the first type is, and Microsoft uses this terminology, user owns data or app owns data. And I'm not sure that the terminology enlightens what we're really doing here. The user owns data is when I'm authenticating against an Active Directory in the same manner that I would if I was just logging into the Power BI portal. So the difference there is Power BI knows who I am as a user because I have authenticated against the Azure Active Directory. But then I'm going to obtain a token which allows me to embed the existing report artifacts in some kind of an application. So under this scenario, it's more similar to what we typically experience with the Power BI portal. The second approach, and that's the approach that we're taking with the Argometric solution, is the app owns data embedding. And this is targeted more towards ISVs. And the difference here is I do not authenticate against Active Directory as a user. What happens is we create a privileged account that is allowed to authenticate the process and then dispense tokens so that I can embed reports in, again, a website or some other kind of solution. And in the case of the first example, you know, there's things that we're used to seeing with the regular portal that we don't see with the app owns data embedding. An example would be if you have slicers that have been selected, those can be associated with a Active Directory login. There's no real Active Directory login with the app owns data embedding, so we don't have this concept of like a person. The authentication and the identification of the user has been delegated to the front end application, and it's the front end's application's job to prove access and then acquire a token that allows me to embed a solution. Okay, so let me take a look at an example of that. Oh, and I should say that under this second scenario, we don't really have access to the Power BI portal as a user because we're not authenticating as a as a licensed user. I almost hate to put slides that have licensing information because it's such a thorny issue, but we're using this A SKU, which is tiered for this ISV embedding. Okay, so let me walk through a visible example of acquiring this type of embedded token. Let me find the right application here. So I'm using an application, and again, I'm going to disqualify myself. I'm not really a web developer. I do know about calling APIs, but I know just enough Postman to sort of prove things out, and then I move on to the next thing. But I have here two examples of API calls, and these are the things that we need to do in order to retrieve an embed token, right? And the embed token is sort of the key to the kingdom for embedding reports. So the first call that we have to make is accessing the Azure Active Directory with a client ID and a client secret, and then it returns an access token, and then I use the access token to get the embedded token, and the embedded token has a limited lifetime, and that's what we put in our code snippets in order to embed a report. So I was testing this earlier. I have a feeling my both of my tokens have probably expired, so I'm going to rerun this here. So now I have an updated access token, and then this automatically populates into the header for this call. So this little bearer access token, this is actually going to take that retrieved token and use it to, let me run this, and we can see this token here. So if you were able to see it, you know, the latter part of this big long string, this big long hash changed. So now what I can do is I can take this, and what can we do with it? Well, I'm going to go over to another piece, and this is one of the pieces that I used to show the web development team how to access and how to implement solutions. And I should say this is not my solution. This is something that the Microsoft CAT team has provided. Ted Pattinson, who's brilliant with all of these various web technologies and Power BI. But let's take a look at just an example here. I'll use this one that we're currently looking at here. And what this is, and I have a link to this, which I'll provide at the end. This is known as the
Tom, can you zoom it a little bit?
Oh, sure. And you know, like this is a downloadable example, so you guys can go and grab this and look at it to your heart's content. And you know, like I said, I've done a little bit of web development, but I do not consider myself a web developer. But I know what pieces we have to touch in order to sort of make this work, right? And so that access token that I just got from Postman is the piece here, and this other variable, this report ID, this corresponds to a deployed report that's on my it's in Power BI, right? So every report, I'm sure everybody knows this, but I'll just review it very quickly. If I can find the right web instance here. So we come over here, and so these are the sample reports that come with this solution. And obviously when I come over here, you can see that the work group is this GUID, and then the report is this GUID here, right? And that's how Power BI identifies everything, and so that's what this represents here. So what we're saying is we're going to embed the report that is uniquely identified by this GUID. We're going to invoke this report embed API, and we're going to do it by passing in this access token. Now the one that's here is expired, right? So I'm going to just eliminate that and replace this guy here. And then change that so we close with a semicolon. And then I'm going to save this now and go over here and fire this up. So these are just a bunch of straight HTML files. And if we open this up with a browser, this is what results. Now, what this is a local file, but it's embedding that report that is referenced by the GUID, and it also has routines in the HTML file that provide special functionality. We're actually going to impact the interface of the report. So these push buttons here just show or hide the various default interface elements that we would normally expect to see when we were working in, the standard Power BI portal. Notice you can toggle into an edit mode, and this is actually one of the functionalities that was so key in the Argometric solution, and I will show you that in a minute, because what we wanted to do is give users the ability to customize their own reports, but we didn't want them to change their existing set of reports. We essentially enable them to edit a report, but we don't enable them to edit a report. They can't save an existing report. In this case here, this report will support both saving the existing definition as well as saving it as a new version of the report. And actually, maybe we should try that. Let me come back over here and we'll look at, okay, so we'll save this and we'll call this ATL demo 03. And so I may not have done a embed token that supports saving the report, which is why that may not have worked. There is, if we go back to Postman and we look at the body, so I think the way this works, this allow edit would allow me to save the report but not save it as something else. There's a bunch of different parameters that you pass in when you request in the body of the API call, and these affect which rights are available for the token that we just retrieved. So in other words, which report I have access to, which data set I have access to, and what I can do with those things are all baked into this great big long hash. So it knows that this API call was set up to save the report, but not to save as. This is a nice sort of, toggle to full screen. And then amazingly enough, I almost hate to do this because I get asked this all the time, and I think you shouldn't try to print Power BI, but here is the option to actually print Power BI. Okay, so that's the basics of how to sort of stand up this embedded solution. And let me come over and I'll show the actual business case. If I can, here, let's see here, where are we? Okay, so this is the Argometrics portal. We have a demo user, and this is what an Amazon seller would see with their information. We hit them right as they're sort of in this landing page. Now, some of these defaults are based on the current date, and we haven't, added new data for the test user for the current date. So this upper right, see details, that's because this is a metric that would rely on there being sales activity in October, and we probably don't have, there's a little bit of latency for that, we just don't have any transactions appearing in October yet. So these actually are reports, but we kind of treat them as a dashboard. So this is kind of like the key metrics that users would want to see right off the bat. And then there's various other seller functions, but the main area here is these are the embedded Power BI reports. And you can come in here and maybe take a look at something like, so here we just have a little bit of activity for this particular, this is similar to a SKU. It's a different way of demarcating a product collection for Amazon. And you can see that this is one of the default reports that is dispensed for the user. But then we also have the ability, you cannot make changes to this report, but you can clone the report. And one of the things that I had to help the web developers figure out is, how do we just enable a save as, right? And it turns out that I'll show you the code for that in a minute. And deleted. Okay, and so then what happened in the background is, through API calls, we created a different version of that report, and I might need to refresh that. So there we go. There we go. And there is the cloned report. So the benefit to us is we have this, sort of template or boilerplate version of the workspace that we use as a starting point for every new seller. We can turn on and off the individual reports based on their subscription level. And then also based on their subscription level, they can choose to customize reports for their own purposes. And since this is a thin report that's a freestanding, PBIX basically, if we need to update the baseline reports, we don't overwrite their changed reports. So this is an important, the factoring of how we did the thin reports was important from a management standpoint for the features that we wanted to realize as part of the solution. Okay. Let me dive back to my slide deck here. Okay. So actually, before I jump over to the REST API section, let me show a couple other examples of what you can do with embedding. I'm going to use the embedded Scratchpad solution that we already looked at once, and I'm just going to grab this whole section here, because this is going to be everything I need to authenticate. And I should say that this is actually a Visual Studio 2019 project that should go and get the tokens by itself. I could not get that part of the solution to work, and I don't know if I have incompatible libraries running. I just didn't have time to debug it. So rather than give up, I just said I'll manually go and get the token, which is a good way to illustrate what's actually taking place through code. This can all be coded with your client ID and your client secret. So the one thing I wanted to mention, let me come over here and look at my notes. So let's jump over to this one here. This is a visual inspector report, and why this is important is in the course of designing embeds, I need to understand what the objects inside a report are named. And what's actually taking place under the hood is that there's a JavaScript library that encapsulates all of the marshalling of the calls between this HTML page and the Power BI service. So essentially, just like we download libraries or download commandlets for PowerShell or download libraries for something like Python, we have this library in JavaScript that encapsulates all the complexity for calling back and forth. We had the need to show a single visual in the Argometric solution. And in order to do that, you need to know what the visual is called. In the world of Power BI, the visuals are given not names, but GUIDs, just like everything else in the world of Power BI. So this visual inspector example iterates through all of the objects in your report and will show you the associated let me see if I've got my, let's zoom it up here. Okay, so you can see it's the same report that we've been looking at, but it adds this additional table just as a straight HTML table. And if you notice, I'll zoom back out. This first report, sales by city, that represents the first two lines of the table. And how many visuals do we have on this report? There's two visuals, right? There's the map and the table. And then sales growth also has 2, revenue breakdown has 4, top 10 customers has 6 or so, and then there's a customer details, which we don't see because it's a hidden report that comes up when we do this drill through here, but it iterates through that hidden report and gives me the it gives me the information about the customer details. And why this is important is if later on in code I want to refer to that element and show or hide it in code, the way to do that is to know what it's called in terms of its actual, show this here. So here is the information that I need. And this actually is one of the gotchas. I don't think I actually mentioned it in my gotcha slide, but I assumed that I could get at this information through the PowerShell API, and it isn't really exposed to that API. At least it wasn't when I was researching this back about 8 or 9 months ago. So you would need to do something like with this JavaScript API. So this is a handy utility. You could actually connect this up, the same routine up to your own report to have it iterate and give you the element names as the GUID as we see here. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the provisioning side of things. So let's come over here, and I've got to find the right version of this guy here. Okay, so this is really a not very modified solution that's been out in the world of Power BI for quite some time. Our provisioning steps basically use this same set of functions. This is in PowerShell, but everything that's done in PowerShell has a corresponding API call that we can call through other interfaces like JavaScript, and that's what we're doing. So just to kind of like run through a quick demo of this, and this is really how we got started with sort of the automatic provisioning, is you know, to sort of say, okay, I have this template workspace. I want to create a new version of that workspace, and right now I'm running under one of my logins in my Sandbox tenant. And let me show you that. Okay, so here I am. I'm logged into Power BI. I'm logged in as a test user named Abner. And Abner has access to two workspaces. One of the workspaces is a copy of the test user that I just demonstrated as part of the Argometrics portal. And then the other was me testing demos earlier this afternoon. So that's this ATL demo 01. Now, if we come over here, and you know, the syntax here is pretty straightforward. Just invoke the PowerShell script. What's the source workspace? What's the target workspace? So we'll create a new target workspace called ATL demo 2. Now it's going to, apparently my credentials have timed out, so I've got to relog in. It's sort of asking me who it's doing this. And this process is actually still fairly manual, meaning that we actually download the files and then to a temporary location, and then make the necessary changes and upload the files to the new location. I haven't found anything more efficient than that, and so that's what we're doing in the real production version of this as well. And so now we come over here and hit refresh, and now we've got the newly provisioned version of the template workspace. Let me talk a little bit about some of the gotchas that we had as a part of this. So probably the biggest and most painful gotcha that we encountered is that we, as an architect, I made a decision early on to try to do everything through the service principal. There are certain operations that cannot be done through REST APIs from the authentication of a service principal. And so what we wound up having to do as a workaround is we do have certain provision steps that take place under a master user account as opposed to under the service principal account. This is perhaps less elegant and less secure than doing everything under a single account, but it's just the case that the functions that we need aren't supported by accessing through the service principal. I think that they're probably creeping towards parity so that we will be able to do this at some point in the future, but that's the current state. So that was a painful one because the error messages that came back were it seemed like it was more of a security issue rather than just you can't invoke the API from the service principal context. So that was probably the biggest pain point. This is mentioned, but not, I think it should be in like, 48-point red bold font on the documentation. It is mentioned, but it's sort of mentioned in passing. You want to pin down your data set ownership and have it be consistent to the same account that is going to be setting the schedule and accessing the credentials. And so as you can see here, every data set has an owner. You want that to be consistent. And so what that means is a lot of the API calls need to take place under that same user account. The thin reports, I mentioned this, do require some extra steps to manage because it's not a single package, everything in one PBIX. So a lot of times I'll have to, open up a report and then redirect it back to a deployed version of the data set. Not the end of the world, but it does require a little bit of, manual manipulation or code-based manipulation. Something that relates to the Azure SKU that we're currently running under. If you start to creep towards close to 100% capacity and you have a momentary data process that pushes you over that capacity, things get kind of backed up and there's a latency before everything resolves, even if you've deleted objects. And I think what it is there's just, an intermittent cleanup task on the cloud side that doesn't happen instantaneously. So there is an Azure capacity report that you can add into your tenant and sort of monitor things. I mentioned the objects and capabilities that are only available via the libraries. So the case of the identifying specific visuals, can't do that through PowerShell. Good news and bad news. They're improving this and making it more streamlined and more efficient. In researching the background for this presentation, I've seen that there's been some improvements. The downside of that is, code that I had working before is now using a library that's been deprecated, and so it no longer works, but that's the price of progress. We did have a case where as the web developers were in a testing mode and we were in the sandbox, they were creating a lot of objects with the same name. And of course, Power BI does not care what the name of something is. It just cares about what the GUID is. So I had to write some PowerShell routines that could sort of see through the logged in user and sort of spin through the entire tenant and collect things and sort of do some cleanup. This is not something that's likely to happen if you're testing code, though, and you're doing, you're deploying things through code. You can have multiple copies of a report that's called, top sales, and they may not, there may be multiple versions, so you do have to watch out for that. Let me show an example of this final point here, and that's this guy over here. So this is an example of looking at everything, and we're logging in as the service principal, and there's a slightly different login protocol to do this. And this is kind of meant to address, how we with sort of automated systems and service accounts, I can't just fire up the portal and take a look because maybe I don't own the objects. right? So I need to look at things using a lower level, which is what this routine is doing for me. So let's see here. Yes, and this is going to make me log in again. Let's see here. Where did I tuck away that document with those logins? Bear with me 1 second here. Okay. So, and the login, when you are logging in as a service principal, is your Azure application client ID, and then what's known as a client secret. And I'll show that in a minute here. And so there we just basically reran the same routine, but this is showing me all workspaces in the tenant, regardless of who owns them, because I'm accessing this as a service principal. And then to sort of show where this information comes from, right? This is the Azure side of setting this up. So right, this is the this would be the same ID that I would be supplying in that login. And then when you're working with a service principal, you can either work via a certificate or a secret. The secret, you can only capture the hash for the secret when you create it. So I can go see that there's one defined here, but I can't get access in. So if I didn't actually capture the secret, then I have to generate a new secret. It's kind of meant to be as a security figure. Okay, that is everything that I had planned. I guess this second bullet point here about the Power BI portal doesn't show you everything, even if you're a Power BI admin. I kind of alluded to this indirectly, but what happened is, the website was touching a report that the developers swore existed, and I was logged in looking at the portal using a pro account but I couldn't see it, and that's really a function of, do I have a defined role within that workspace, which might seem obvious, but it didn't to me at the time. So the last piece, and I will make this available through some follow-up, is this, which is all of the references and resources that I used. Some of these I used as part of architecting the solution for Argometrics. Some of these didn't exist when we were doing it. This would be everything you need to look at and download in order to get yourself started with ISV embedding. And there's a lot of great content here. The demo application that I was showing, this Power BI embedded Scratchpad, this really was how I proved to our web developers what was possible with Power BI and embedding. Great. Well, are there any questions? Anybody want to see anything in particular?
Hi, Tom. We're waiting for, I think somebody's typing in here. But meanwhile, I want to ask you a couple of things. So, as you probably know, Power BI is limited to 1,000 workspaces per user. Did you run in these limitations, and how did you solve it?
So we have not run into that limitation yet. And no, so really great question. And you know, I sort of alluded to this in the early slide. Speed to market, right, is a big compelling thing to the client, which means that we don't have every T crossed and every I dotted. There is a note in our system documentation about that limitation. And I don't actually know what the answer is. I mean, the answer would be an additional tenant, an additional capacity. It's something that we are going to be looking at shortly.
Yeah, I think the limitation is actually per user accessing the workspaces. So I believe if you create multiple service principals, probably should be able to, so let's say 1,000 workspaces, you're going to use that service principal to access the rest, another one that might be able to address it. I also personally haven't run into with some of my clients with this limitation, but I would imagine at some point that's going to happen.
Yes.
The second question that I have is for the service principal. As you probably noticed, Microsoft changed their maximum lifetime. There used to be a setting for indefinitely to hold the secret, and now I think the maximum is like 2 years. So that's, I don't know why they did it, but that's the policy change. So did you guys come up with any mitigation strategy? Because in 2 years, I would imagine the application will stop working, the embedding will stop working because the secret would expire, basically.
That is another excellent question. And we have not come up with a mitigation strategy. And actually, your question is reminding me that I don't know what setting the current secret was created under. And that begs the question, did Microsoft just basically, so I don't think it was done. I would have done it, and I doubt I would have done it forever, right? Because that just seems like, another set of problems. I probably did it for the 24-month mark. We are at probably 12 months right now. So we'll definitely need to get on that.
It's a ticking bomb.
Yes, yes.
And the last thing that I want to mention here, you ask about the follow-up to put some, to share your materials. We don't have any space to upload because we're hosting on Meetup, but what you can do, maybe you can host it in your blog and send me a link. And then when I upload the video, I'm just going to say, and I'm just going to include that link as well, if that's okay with you.
That's perfect. I'd be happy to do that. Yeah.
Got it. And we have a couple of comments, questions from the audience. Dinesh is saying very interesting subject matter and presentation. Thank you very much. So this is just appreciation. It was very interesting for me as well how you solve this issues. And then how is asking what Microsoft Graph or Power BI permission were granted to the registered app for JavaScript?
Okay, good question. It's not so much that the specific app for JavaScript is registered. What you do have to do is if you're accessing it via either a service principal name or a master user, there are specific permissions that you do have to grant both from the Azure side and from the Power BI side. So there's a setting in the Power BI tenant that allows you to let me reshare my screen here. So here to this guy. So this is part one. And then it's under developer settings, I think. Let's see here. Yes. So allow service principals to use Power BI APIs. That's one. And then I think I have an example that I captured. Let me see if I have this ready to go.
And while we're looking for this, maybe I can just chime in and reply to how that. So remember when Tom was talking about there are two types of embedding solution: user owns data and app owns data. And his solution was based on app owns data. My understanding is that when you do app owns data, in other words, embedding for your external customers, the permissions that you have on Azure for Power BI or Graph, they're completely irrelevant because you're requesting the reports on behalf of the user using a service principal that you have to add as a member to at least a member in the Power BI workspace.
Yes.
So that's how the authentication is going to work. For user owns data, these permissions apply. And then if you use that provisioning tool that Microsoft has, I'm not sure, Tom, if you want to talk about, but there is a provisioning tool that actually you can use for Power BI embedded. And this permissions actually become important. But for app owns data, you don't need to grant that service principal any permissions in the Azure portal because it's done through the membership in the Power BI workspace.
Yes. So if we come over here and do this guy here. So what you can see is, here's an example. This is a workspace that's been set up to support embedding. And then we have this, I created the service principal, and then they're an admin in the workspace. So essentially they have the rights. And this is, both an asset and a liability, right? So when we do app owns data embedding, we're saying we've got security handled. All I need is the token to get the embedded piece. And so there's some implied responsibility from the application side that, yes, we've authenticated the user and we're not going to do anything that's bad via code, right?
Right, Tom. And one thing just to mention here, in fact, we had a discussion with Ted Pedersen about this. So member also will work. Admin obviously is the most dangerous setting in here.
Yes.
The fully you granting all the privileges, but member also will work. So typically what I do for my clients, actually, I ask them to do a member. I think that should be sufficient. If you run in any cases where admin is required, please let me know.
Yes. Yeah, and actually this is me following Ted's notes.
Yep.
So and his notes was more focused on teaching. The rule of sort of least privilege would indicate that member would be, and I should say I'm showing the Sandbox, which is not the same thing as the production Argometrics solution. So
Sure.
this is something, everything that you see here is going to disappear by the end of the week, because this is sort of my playground and my sandbox. I try to reflect good security practices, but sometimes I'll take shortcuts because this is meant to be sort of, deleted when I'm done.
Excellent. We got a question from Janissa. She's asking, I'm exploring using embedded reports in a customized landing page for users who prefer to access all their reports in a web page. Should we use app owns data embedding in this case? So Tom, I'll chime in a moment, but what do you think about that scenario?
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say as well, Teo. I would say the thing that we noticed, if they're already licensed, you have some benefits in that things can be memorized based on their their login, so like slicer settings and things along those lines, and probably activity usage as well, which we don't really get the same level when you're doing app owns data. So I would probably, if you're not going to incur additional licensing fee, then it would seem to me that you get some additional stuff for free if you're using the the organization owns data approach. So that would probably be what I would look at. What do you think, Teo?
Yeah, so the first question to Janessa would be, these users, are they internal in your organization or they are external, users outside your company domain? So this is where probably I would start the discussion, because, if they're internal, so maybe you can reply,
Oh
Janessa,
yeah,
to let me.
sorry. Hi. Yes, they are internal, but
Okay.
do they need Power BI Pro license
Mm, they do.
to access the
So
reports? Yeah. But they
yeah.
don't have, so they're just viewers. So they don't have Pro license, but I'm assuming because this is premium.
Hold on a
Um,
second. So you are on Power BI Premium then, I would assume, if they
yes.
don't have a Pro
The-
license? Okay, so they have everything they need. If you're on Premium, then you would, these users will be covered. So you can embed, you can do whatever you want with your reports.
Okay.
But
Okay.
now the question becomes, and this is a very interesting question, because a lot of customers actually have the same requirement. They want to put their reports on a SharePoint, or they have their own home grown portal of some kind. I want to put everything in one place. So uh, the easiest way for you, if you don't want to write any code, because Power BI embedding API requires coding. So
Mhm.
the easiest approach will be to, let's say this is that a SharePoint or that's a homegrown web portal?
Oh, well, we have SharePoint. We can use that as well. So I'm just
Okay.
exploring different options. So
Right.
SharePoint, I think, will do as well.
So maybe I can take a little bit of sharing here and I can show you what will be the first approach to start. And this is how typically I start the conversation. So I'm gonna go to Power BI. Not that one, sorry, this one. So because there is a lot of customers asking for this, Microsoft have decided to, let's say, make that easier to some extent. So what you can do, maybe you know about this feature, but you can go to your report. Let's say this is the report that I want to make available for my users. I can go to File and I can say Embed Report in a website or a portal. So this is where you will go if you want to embed it into a SharePoint on-prem. If you want to do SharePoint online, there is even a better way. That's why we have two options in here. But you will go in here, and what you're going to get is iframe code. So you will put that iframe code into your page on your portal. You can also give a link, but typically, if you want to have this embedded effect, you would want to go probably with the iframe. And that might be the easiest thing for you. The caveat of doing this approach is authentication. Because when the users go to the browser, let's say they go to your home portal, this is a new browser session, it's going to ask them to authenticate at least once. And from that point, that token that Tom was talking about, that's going to be in the browser. So from that point, actually, they keep on requesting reports, and then they're going to ask to authenticate. So the single sign-on, a lot of organizations want actually transparently the homegrown portal to pass the user to Power BI, but currently there is no way for this to happen. So the browser can remember the credentials. There are some things the browser can help, but at least once you should expect, when they restart the computer or when they go to the browser, open a new session, they should be asked you to authenticate at least once. If you want to avoid this, if you want to do like a single sign-on or something, there is no other way that I know today to do that than to use Power BI embedded. So this is the APIs that Tom was talking about. This is where you have to write code, and it's just becoming much more complicated thing to do. So if you can get, so just to recap, if you want to get away, if you can get away with asking the user to authenticate once per browser session, then this probably will be the best approach. If not, then you gotta go to the Power BI embedded rabbit hole, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Tom, what do you think? Did I miss anything or?
No, I think that's good. I would say that my experience, so I had a client, the major embedded solution that I did before this one that we just talked about today was a client where they already had a pretty mature and effective authentication process for sort of an extranet.
Right.
And they did not want to have the clients re-authenticate, so we set up embedding for them. The code is fairly trivial. I mean, it's not, if I can figure out how it works, and I am not a web developer, then nearly anybody can figure out how it's supposed to work. The other thing is it does future proof or sort of user experience proof, because you control how they are authenticating, right? So there are some advantages to it. And the one thing I didn't show, which I should have, I have links to it, but is the embedded playground, where there's examples where you can actually embed your code and then see, like, get the report from your workspace. I'll include a video that sort of demos the embedded playground. But I would say, if you're struggling to manage like the logins and the sign-ons, it might be better to just, you're on your way there. It might be better to just, do a simple embedded solution, and then you've got full control over whether somebody has to authenticate or how frequently, and you can cache things. I just saw somewhere a blog post, I believe, something that proactively like pulls the token and like reacquires another one before the one expires, so you can come up with a fairly seamless user experience.
Right. This is the, I'm showing the playground that Tom was referring to. Essentially, this is an app that demonstrates the Power BI embedded. And to Tom's point, the other advantage of going with Power BI embedded is that you have more features, basically. You have a JavaScript, you can do actually things you cannot do in Power BI portal, because you have a whole JavaScript library APIs that you can control. So some of the things, for example, you can do, you can have your own parameter page if you want, like a customized filtering thing, and then you can pass those things to Power BI. You can hide pages, you can hide things dynamically. So Microsoft built a whole comprehensive framework around Power BI embedded. The caveat, Tom was saying, yeah, there is a straightforward, but you still have to have a developer to write. There is a server-side code that needs to happen. There is also a client-side code that needs to happen. True, it's a boilerplate. You can, there is a samples and stuff, but it's additional effort. Awesome. Any other questions? See? Any other questions, guys? I think if not, I guess Janice is typing. Let's see. Also present. Okay, so this is, well, I think that's going to be it. I'm just going to put the recordings in about an hour, probably less than that, after this meeting. And Tom, if you're kind enough to send me that link, or later, whenever you're up to, we'll put it in the description where people actually can download and you can read your blog and get access to all the good stuff you've got there. Great. For them, right?
I will certainly do that.
Thank you so much for your time, Tom. Guys, thank you. Again, the next meeting is going to be first Monday of November. where we're going to be talking about Power BI artificial intelligence. Until then, stay healthy and all the best.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.